Afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us for today's program. My name is Melissa Loriano, and I serve as the Programs Associate for the DC Preservation League.
And my name is Kate Morgan, and I am the Public History Fellow for the DC Preservation League, as well as a graduate student in the Public History program at American University.
So before we begin today, I just want to share a few brief technical notes about how today's program will work. So please use the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Kate and I will be answering any questions at the end of the presentation. And for those of you joining us on Facebook, our colleague Jess Unger is monitoring the chat and will pass along your questions to us as well. If we don't get to everybody's questions today, we're going to make a note of all the ones that we missed, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. I also want to mention that this presentation is being recorded for the National Council on Public History's 2021 annual meeting. The recording will be shared with the meeting's attendees, and Kate and I are scheduled for a live Q&A on Friday, March 26th at 12:30. We encourage you to register for the annual meeting if you're interested. The program is full of very interesting topics and sessions. I also want to take a moment to say that this series of bus tours that we are going to talk about today really speaks to the collaborative nature of historic preservation and public history. This project would not have been possible without DCPL's Community Outreach and Grants Manager, Jess Unger, and our Summer 2020 interns, Andrew Wong and Rebecca Pelham. So today, we're going to give a brief overview about the history of the early bus tours created by Don't Tear It Down, that this new series takes inspiration from, and how the DC Preservation League today is continuing to encourage the community to explore their built environment on public transportation. We will then explore the tours included in this series, but take a closer look at one of the bus routes with Kate in a little bit. All right. Next slide, please. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the DC Preservation League, formerly known as Don't Tear It Down, we are a citywide nonprofit dedicated to the preservation, protection, and enhancement of the historic and built environment in Washington, DC through advocacy and education. So in 1971, a group of concerned Washingtonians came together to discuss their shared distress at the steady destruction of historic buildings in the nation's capital. The collective drive to protect these places eventually gave birth to Don't Tear It Down, an activist lobbying group dedicated to the preservation of DC's built environment. And following its first successful campaign to protect the old post office on Pennsylvania Avenue, Don't Tear It Down quickly became a model organization in the growing preservation movement sweeping the nation. So the education component of the organization's mission was strong from the very beginning, with Don't Tear It Down sponsoring tours, lectures, and visiting restoration projects and architects' offices. And in 1976, Don't Tear It Down launched Take One Tour, a series of brochures they distributed on city buses. The tours emphasized the importance of protecting our physical environment, all while showing commuters what historic sites could be found along their route. And as a way to connect with our organization's earliest advocacy efforts during a year when we are celebrating our 50th anniversary, the DC Preservation League has created Riding Through the Past, a series of 6 new public bus tours along the most popular routes in the District of Columbia. However, instead of using brochures, these tours are accessible using DCPL's free mobile app and website, DC Historic Sites, which Kate will explore with you all in a little bit. So like Don't Tear It Down, we recognize that transportation offers preservationists and public historians a unique space to explore the significance of our history and our built environment with the community. So by using a digital tool like DC Historic Sites, we are able to bring one of the organization's earliest initiatives to modern day audiences, while also making learning about these stories more interactive and accessible. So with that, I'm going to pass things along to Kate.
Yeah, so I will now talk about creating Riding Through the Past. DC Historic Sites hosts Riding Through the Past. It is DC Preservation League's free geolocating resource based on the DC Inventory of Historic Sites, or the city's official list of places identified for protection for their contribution to the cultural heritage of the city and the nation's capital. Using the Omeka platform, DC Historic Sites acts as a digital inventory for visitors to engage with historic sites via our app or on the web. Currently, there are over 800 public sites and 18 curated tours. To view some of our tours, use the QR code in the right corner to take you to DC Historic Sites.
And just as a note, if you are in full screen mode, you might need to drag our little speaker boxes down to see the QR code.
So these 6 popular Metrobus routes selected convey the rich diversity of Washington, D.C. Riding the 90 is on the next slide, so there are 5 there. It was important to have all 4 quadrants of the city represented and as many communities included as possible. We also tried to represent various types of historic sites, such as theaters, libraries, churches, homes, embassies, statues, and historic districts, to name a few. To start exploring some of these historic sites, use the QR code in the bottom left corner of the bus images to take you to the specific bus tours on DC historic sites. Riding a bus allows you to traverse the city and witness your historic surroundings in a new way. You start to understand the connection of your communities and your place within them, be that as a resident, a commuter, or a casual visitor to Washington, D.C. The bus provides a captive audience to engage in these conversations about diversity, community, development, and change over time through the unique historic sites. To walk you through this process, we're going to describe each of these tours and show you the 90s Metrobus routes more in depth.
So starting in the left-hand corner, Riding the 30s features neighborhoods in Northwest DC to Georgetown, through downtown and Capitol Hill, and across the Anacostia River. Looking out the bus window or on your computer screen, historic sites along this route provide a glimpse into the development of DC's financial district, the federal sector, and the city's expanding neighborhoods from the late 19th through the 20th centuries. Riding the 70s includes sites ranging from monumental federal buildings to local historic fire stations and theaters. The route traverses the city from north to south, traveling past Howard University down to the National Mall. Riding the S lines follows 16th Street and echoes Mary Foote Henderson's plans to develop the road as a diplomatic and ceremonial heart of Washington, D.C., with embassies, statues, prominent homes, and houses of worship. Riding the X2 highlights DC's Black communities in Northeast, the Asian American community in Chinatown, and DC's executive core in Lafayette Square. Riding the 50s follows 14th Street and symbolizes the expansion of the federal workforce during the early to mid-20th century, particularly the residential and commercial infrastructure that developed around it from 16th Street Heights, Columbia Heights, and downtown DC.
Next, we'll take a closer look at the 90s routes, which explores the Northwest, Northeast, and Southeast quadrants of Washington, D.C. If you'd like to follow along, use the QR code to the right of the map. And I'll wait a few seconds in case you want to do so. Both Metrobus Route 90 and 92 operate between Southeast DC and Duke Ellington Bridge, which is pictured here, via 8th Street, Florida Avenue, and U Street. Historically, the U Street Garfield line was a streetcar route which operated under the Capital Traction Company till the late 19th century. Along this route today, you'll travel along the U Street corridor. Known for its rich connection to Black history, the corridor serves as the heart of Black culture and entertainment in the city. Once known as Black Broadway, several theaters, including the Lincoln, Dunbar, and Howard Theater featured on this tour, remind us of where some of the greatest musicians of the late 20th century got their start. Along Florida Avenue, the historic Gallaudet University campus and Union Market Historic District occupy the northeast quadrant of the city. Founded in 1864, Gallaudet University is one of the world's premier collegiate institutions for deaf and hard of hearing students. Here's a picture of Chapel Hall, a listed historic site on campus. Today, the building houses the National Deaf Life Museum. Across the way, one of my favorites, Union Market contributes to a commercial as well as historic district, conceived in 1928 by a federation of wholesalers called the Union Terminal Market Association. These merchants anticipated the demolition of Center Market for construction of the Federal Triangle. Thus, they moved uptown, north of Massachusetts Avenue, or NOMA, and opened Union Market in the early 1930s. The route also features the Washington Navy Yard. Between 1900 and 1918, the growth of the Washington Navy Yard sparked a development boom along the 8th Street Southeast corridor. The increased population of both military personnel and civilians, along with the general propensity at the time, was a boon to area businesses. This area also features one of DC's smallest historic districts, the Marine Barracks. Established in 1801 on a site selected by Thomas Jefferson, The Marine Barracks is entirely surrounded by a residential community and retains much of the feel of a 19th century military post. The 90s further crossed the Anacostia River into the Anacostia Historic District, a historically Black community. Originally nominated to the National Register of Historic Sites in 1978, DCPL is working with community partners to expand the boundaries of the historic district.
As you can see, a huge part of DCPL's work is to make the community aware of what's around them. The app is such an important resource because, like Kate mentioned, wherever you are, it can introduce you to historic places in your area that maybe you just didn't know about before. Implementing the app on public transportation in particular amplifies that opportunity and makes it more accessible. Public transportation takes us through many different neighborhoods and past many historic places that represent our city's history and identity. We also hope that it helps bring more excitement in the otherwise mundane parts of our everyday commutes and instills a sense of activism in all of us towards protecting these special places that embody the character of our communities and our histories. And with that, we will open it up to Q&A. Okay, we got a question from Juliet. Would it be possible to add some film type segments to the tours? Yeah, so the app actually includes the ability, like within the platform, to add audio and video. And we've been thinking of different ways to experiment with this and what exactly we might use to like supplement some of these tours or entries for certain historic sites. So it's definitely possible, and I think it's a very cool idea that we will like continue to explore for the future.
And I see in the chat that John mentions that it would be nice to have a DC History Museum. I agree with you. Local history is awesome. Mm-hmm. There was at one point plans for something called a street museum that I believe Don't Tear It Down was somewhat involved with. I've been looking through the papers in our 50th anniversary to try and figure out kind of our institutional history. And so I know we were involved with that at one point. I don't know currently if there's any plans to do that in the future. That was one thing. So Barb asks, who were some of the famous musicians? Names include Ella Fitzgerald, as well as Duke Ellington, which the bridge was named after him after he passed away in 1974. If you're following along on the DC Historic Sites app, you can see more of the names listed there as well.
Mm-hmm. So an anonymous asker asked, how have the tours changed, adapted because of COVID-19? So we totally understand that, like, with our given health crisis, like not everybody is up for being on the bus or on any sort of public transportation, which is completely fine. You don't have to be on the bus to enjoy these. But, you know, if you happen to be riding one of these bus routes, it's kind of easier to look out the window and see. But each of the tours includes photographs, historic and contemporary. So even though you can't be there on the bus and experiencing these things in person, there are still like kind of visuals that are included to kind of help you still see and enjoy these places. But beyond that, we didn't really change the content at all, I don't think, Kate, right? Just,
nope. Yeah. You can view it now in COVID times and hopefully after.
Yes, exactly. And Barb, oh, go ahead, Kate.
You can go with Barb's question. I was going to turn to the chat.
Okay. Yep. So Barb asked, do you advertise on the bus routes? Not at the moment. I think in the future, that's definitely something that we want to explore. I think especially, you know, with the QR codes, that's a really cool way to kind of give people that tool very easily to look at. So no, not at the moment, not on the bus routes, but follow us on social media. That's where we usually promote stuff. Great question.
At one point, but we're still working on it. So hopefully it's coming to a bus route near you soon. So in our chat, Tyler asks, how did you work with local community members to help share their stories and histories? So with historic preservation, we work with community partners to help preserve and share their stories, whether that's through public programming or helping them to fill out nomination forms for the DC Inventory of Historic Sites. And once that is submitted to the DC Inventory of Historic Sites, if it's nominated to this master list, then the Historic Preservation Office will pass that along to the National Register, where it can be nominated to that list as well. So all these processes help save whether that's historic homes, landmarks, sites, historic districts. That's partially how we work with local communities. Melissa's been doing this a little longer than I have, so Melissa, do you have anything else to share on that?
Yeah, and the great thing about the app too, it's like we have collaborated with other organizations. We've collaborated with like Prologue DC, the Historic Preservation Office, DCBIA, and they have curated tours that we now house on the app. So, you know, if you know an organization or you're part of an organization and you think you might be interested in like talking to us more about like different tours that you might want to curate for the app, we're very much open to that and to having those conversations, because I think that's a really fun collaborative way where we can all kind of use this platform, not just DCPL, but the community in general.
John also notes that you can drive through many of these neighborhoods too. So if you are sick of being in your house and looking at, you know, DC historic sites just on your computer, you can also take these out into the community, whether it's using these as a walking tour, as a driving tour, and you can follow along the app. So thank you for pointing that out as well.
Yeah, and just to note, recently we added kind of like estimations of how long it would take to drive with these tours, how long it might take to walk. So that information is there as well. And hopefully it'll be helpful to you if you're thinking of doing that.
And Juliet also brings up a really good point that we could add links to the description of the property that could lead to the site's website, so people can get more info on the building and organization. Sometimes I don't think it necessarily shows the information on the mobile app, unfortunately, but if you go to our website through DC Historic Sites, sometimes there's more related links. So you can look at a lot of the sources that we use to help compile all of this information, whether it's the National Register forms, different documents through the government, or their home pages like that as well.
Great questions, everybody.
I also see that Beth asks, are the tours narrated? In a way, the way that they're kind of written is supposed to be in a narrative style. So hopefully you'll be able to follow along on the bus tours as if you were riding them. So it will go down the street and you'll see whether you're going north to south through the city, east to west. You'll be able to look out your window or hop off the bus and do a short walk to the historic site to see more about it. So it's kind of in order in that way so that you can view the sites as you see them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and John mentioned, as long as the streets are not clogged with traffic, New York Avenue has much great history. Many see from sitting in their car for a while. Yes, so yep, you know, traffic in DC, it's very usual. I mean, that gives you more reading time maybe, if anything, where you can enjoy a site a little bit longer, but yeah. Good point, John. Again, if you have any other questions following the presentation, you can email us at info@dcpreservation.org, which is listed here on this slide. So, you know, given the public health emergency, we recognize that many folks may not be riding their usual routes. But if you're feeling sentimental or just want to learn more about the sites along each route, we hope that you'll take a moment to explore these tours on the app. And you can download the app for free from the Apple App Store or Google Play, or visit historicsites.dcpreservation.org from your computer. And if you would like to learn more about the app, DCPL will be participating on a panel at the American Association for State and Local History Conference this year. The session will discuss how digital place-based storytelling has benefited from community engagement. We also hope that you will join us in celebrating DCPL's 50th anniversary this year. The celebration officially begins in April 2021 and will include a robust calendar of programs. So please be on the lookout for a more formal announcement about the celebration. And with that, I just want to thank you all so much again for joining us today and hope that you enjoy these tours.